The angel had no warning. She was hovering about 3 meters above the arena floor when the hand closed around her ankle, human fingers, deliberate and unhurried, and pulled her out of the air. The shock held her quiet for a full second. Angels did not get grabbed. They presided over these killing floors from a height. They pointed at players and watched them dissolve. They were the unquestionable ceiling of this system, the mechanism of divine authority that had been processing human lives for months. Then the hand found her wing and tore it free. There was no thunder, no divine cord cutting out. Just a wet, fibrous rip and a burst of gold light that opened and faded the way light does when a bulb blows, sudden and then nothing. Her scream arrived late, high and ragged, far too human for a being that had spent the past hour selecting which players deserved to survive the night. She hit the stone floor on her back. Her remaining wing beat the ground in weakening, frantic arcs. He stood over her, 20 years old, unremarkable to look at, the kind of face that dissolves from memory the moment someone turns away. Medium height, dark eyes holding the flat, focused quality of someone who had seen this particular problem before and already knew its solution. She tried to speak, her lips shaped words from a language older than the arena they stood in. He found her second wing and tore that one free as well. The gold light bloomed and died. She lay still, breathing in shallow pulls, the luminous quality of her skin already draining toward gray. He crouched beside her, produced a small glass vial from inside his jacket, and pressed it to the wound at her shoulder. Her blood was the color of liquid sunlight. He watched the vial fill with the steady attention you give to something simmering on a stove. When it was full, he stood. The scythe materialized in his other hand, curved, black-boned, absorbing the ambient light rather than catching it. He paused for one moment, aware of 99 previous loops in which this scene had never happened. Then he raised the scythe, and one of the angels lost her place in the celestial hierarchy permanently. Feathers settled around his boots in slow, aimless drifts. He stood in the quiet for a moment, holding a vial that no human hand had ever held before, and felt something release in his chest. Something that had been wound tight across decades of compounded failure and restart and failure again. To understand how a 20-year-old in South Korea ended up standing over a dismembered divine arbiter in a dimension that technically didn't exist, you need to go back. Not years, just hours. Back to midnight on New Year's Eve, when 10,000 people packed a plaza in Gangnam and the sky above the city cracked open. The countdown hit 0 at exactly midnight. The plaza disappeared. The fireworks disappeared. 10,000 young Koreans blinked into existence on a flat stone platform under a sky the color of dried blood, the air carrying a faint metallic quality that none of them could quite identify. Then a luminous figure descended from above and began to speak. Her name was Buriel. She delivered the situation with the detached efficiency of someone reading a safety briefing on a flight they found beneath them. 1.8 billion humans between the ages of 15 and 29 had been selected across the planet for 20 monthly trials. Half the participants would be eliminated each round. Eliminated was not a euphemism. Survivors would return to their physical bodies in the real world. The others would simply stop being real. A young man near the back of the crowd, voice still steady, impressively, asked if this was some kind of hoax. Burial's gaze found him. A moment later, the space he had occupied was empty. The plaza went very quiet. Ryu Min stood near the left pillar formation and felt nothing but a particular, workmanlike calm. He had heard Burial's speech 99 times. He knew its pauses, its specific phrasing, and the things it deliberately chose not to say. He also knew that in approximately 4 minutes, the first goblin wave would emerge from the left pillar corridor, and that positioning mattered considerably more than anything else happening right now. He moved left. Nobody noticed him go. His younger brother was the reason for all of it. The reason he had come back each time, across every failed loop, into the same opening moments of the same catastrophe. Ryu Won was 14 years old and had the uncomplicated decency of someone who had never learned to protect himself with suspicion. Their parents had died 3 years ago, a wet road, a moment's inattention, the ordinary arithmetic of disaster, and the two of them had been managing since on government support, part-time income, and Ryu Min's obsessive accounting of every expense down to the coin. One never complained about any of it. He split his food before he started eating, out of a habit so ingrained he probably didn't notice doing it anymore. in case Ryu Min came home late and hadn't eaten. He did his homework at the kitchen table with headphones in, so the sound from the television wouldn't disturb his brother trying to sleep. In previous loops, one had been hurt, blinded in one timeline by a school bully's fist, taken hostage in 3 others to pressure Ryu Min during high-stakes moments he hadn't anticipated. The specific shape of the harm varied across 99 attempts. The underlying cause was always Ryu Min failing somewhere he should have planned better. This was the 100th loop. The system had confirmed it. No restart waiting on the other side. Whatever happened across these 20 rounds would be the permanent, unchangeable future. The goblins came from the left corridor at the 3-minute and 50-second mark, exactly when Ryu Min had placed himself. They were knee-high, fast, and produced a collective noise like a warehouse full of drawers being slammed open at once. The crowd's reaction was immediate and counterproductive. People splitting in 6 directions simultaneously, colliding with each other, generating more casualties in the first 30 seconds than the goblins did. Ryu Min moved through the near edge of the first cluster without breaking stride. He had no class yet. The system held those until level 5, but he had a body trained across decades of compounded effort across every loop he had lived, and he had the complete tactical map of every goblin's patrol route, HP value, and attack pattern committed to memory that had been refining this knowledge since the 11th loop. He cleared 10 goblins in under 2 minutes. The arena announcer, a second angel, smaller, perched at the far end of the platform, marked each 10th kill by count in a voice stripped of all personality. At 30 kills from a single participant, a cluster of survivors had stopped fleeing long enough to look. At 50, the announcer's voice developed a texture it hadn't carried before. Something minute, but there. He finished the 100th at the 12-minute mark. Slightly winded, a graze across his forearm he had judged not worth dodging, blood drying on his sleeve. The arena went quiet in the particular way of 10,000 people recalibrating their understanding of what they were watching. The system materialized his rewards. A rare stiletto, 3,000 gold, and then, separately, in a casing glowing faintly blue, the title called Last Traveler. He accepted it without ceremony. The passive loaded into his status screen. Death triggers 60 seconds in spirit form, then full resurrection at maximum health, usable once per round. A safety net that required 100 goblins solo clear to unlock, which was why, across 99 previous attempts, no player had possessed it going into round 2. The announcer read the rankings. First place overall, Ryu Min, 100 kills. Second place, 44. He walked toward the exit without looking back. Behind him, 10,000 pairs of eyes tracked an unremarkable young man in no armor, holding a stiletto, who appeared mildly inconvenienced by the attention he was receiving. He woke in his apartment at 2 in the morning. The trial dimension released you back into your body with the full physical feedback intact, muscle fatigue, the graze on his forearm already beginning to crust over, and he lay still for a moment, listening to the building. One's breathing reached him through the wall, slow and even. Ryu Min got up, made instant noodles from an old habit he'd carried through every upgrade to their circumstances without quite managing to drop, and ate them at the kitchen counter while reviewing his list for the coming week. The lottery winnings were already deposited and legally structured. 100 identical first-place jackpot stubs, purchased across 5 different retailers over 3 days, spaced just carefully enough to avoid the fraud detection triggers he had mapped during Loop 47. The bank meeting had produced the precise expression of a branch president who had prepared for a routine appointment and found instead a 20-year-old presenting a bound financial analysis alongside 100 consecutively numbered winning tickets. The man had called 3 colleagues before completing a sentence. They had all checked the stubs, everything was legitimate, and the mathematics of it was something the president would need to quietly accept and not attempt to explain to anyone. The investments had moved the same afternoon. Gains would begin compounding within 3 weeks. One thought their luck had finally turned. Ryu Min had leased a high-floor unit in a building that also housed 2 people he needed access to. He had told Juan it was a good deal he had spotted on short notice. Juan believed him. He always did. He left before dawn and took the first bus to Bang Taegu's district. Taegu was 17 and large in the way of someone who had found early that size got results, and had been running a low-grade extortion operation at Juan's school for close to a year. Lunch money, electronics, fabricated debts engineered specifically to trap students with no family resources to appeal to. He wasn't the sharper of the two people currently orbiting his brother's life. That distinction belonged to Ryu Min, who was smarter, more patient, and had already begun flagging Won's situation as something exploitable. But Taegu was the one who used his fists, and in one specific previous timeline, he had struck Ryu Won in a school stairwell with enough force to rupture a blood vessel in his eye. The damage in that loop had been permanent. Ryu Min found Taegu in the lobby of his building at 6 in the morning, coming in from somewhere he shouldn't have been, shoes damp, moving with the head-down shuffle of someone avoiding notice. Taegu clocked Ryu Min in the automatic way of someone accustomed to sizing up potential obstacles. Assessed, dismissed. He moved to step past. Ryu Min moved with him. What followed was not a fight. Ryu Min named 6 specific facts, 4 dates, 3 locations, 2 individuals present at each one. He watched the confident dismissal in Taegu's expression move through confusion into something colder, the particular fear of a person who realizes someone knows something they never told anyone. Ryu Min explained, without raising his voice, that documentation of those facts sat with 2 separate parties who had instructions on when to use it. No threats were issued explicitly. He simply described a reality that already existed. Then he took Taegu's right hand by the wrist and applied a controlled downward torque to the second and third fingers. 2 clean snaps. Taegu produced a short, choked sound and went very still. Ryu Min told him that if Won was touched again, both hands would follow. He walked out through the lobby into a morning just beginning to lighten at the edges of the buildings. He caught the next bus, made rice when he got home, and was sitting with his coffee when Won came out of his room in his school uniform, complained about a homework deadline, and added too much soy sauce to his bowl without looking up. Ryu Min listened and responded where appropriate. He watched Won eat with the specific, quiet pleasure of a thing that should have been ordinary, but had required 99 attempts to get right. The financial activity attracted attention on the 11th day, 3 days ahead of his own estimate. Ma Kyung-rok was 23, heir to the Osan Group, and currently constructing Celestial Demon Consultancy as an independent venture separate from his family's holdings. He had been inside the survival trials long enough to reach a conclusion that was both correct and relatively uncommon among the people his age with power. That future information was the most leveraged asset anyone could hold, in a world where monthly death rounds were beginning to restructure ordinary economics. When his analysts flagged an unusual cluster of investment positions, all returning extraordinary gains, all attached to a single account belonging to a 20-year-old with no prior portfolio history, he had them run a full background check. The check returned an address. The address matched a unit in his building. He sent a car on a Thursday afternoon. Ryu Min was already dressed when it arrived. The Celestial Demon offices were spare and precise, the kind of space designed to communicate capability through the deliberate removal of anything unnecessary. Kyung-rok met him in a glass-walled room on the 14th floor and regarded him across a table with the still attention of someone who had learned to read people fast and trusted what he found. He was lean, unhurried in his movements, and had a specific quality of flatness around the eyes that Ryu Min, across multiple loops of working alongside him, associated with a man who had made certain decisions and then stopped returning to them. Ryu Min introduced himself. He said he held a unique game class called Prophet, which provided a limited form of future sight. He proposed a partnership. Kyung-rok told him to prove it. Ryu Min laid out 6 predictions with specific timelines, 2 stock positions, a political announcement scheduled for the following Friday, a commercial court ruling currently pending, and 2 upcoming game mechanics developments that would affect player positioning in rounds 2 and 3. He described each one plainly, without dramatizing any of them. Over the next 11 days, all 6 resolved exactly as described. Kyung-rok called him back. The second meeting had 3 board members present and a lawyer seated slightly apart. Ryu Min arrived with a document, 60 pages, bound, covering projected economic disruptions, player population shifts, and strategic positioning across 18 months of upcoming trial rounds. The board members were men in their 50s with decades of collective skepticism, and they sat reading it with the expression of professionals who were accustomed to being the most prepared people in any given room and had just encountered an exception. Kyung-rok let them read. Then he looked across the table and asked what Ryu Min needed from him. That question was the beginning of something that would eventually move a significant share of Earth's surviving players through the remaining rounds. The full shape of it would take months to become clear. Right now, Ryu Min had one more confirmation to make before round 2 opened. Min Jury worked Wednesday and Saturday evenings at her parents' convenience store, a corner shop with shelves stocked a little too full, and a cash register with one key that had been slightly sticky since sometime during her first year running the evening shift. She restocked the drink fridge during the first hour of each shift. She kept a small notepad behind the register for lists she made and then rarely consulted. She had been Ryu Min's classmate in 11 previous loops, and he knew her schedule well enough to predict her movements to within 5 minutes. He came in on a Wednesday, bought a drink he didn't particularly want, and asked if she remembered him from third period. She said she did. The response was professionally composed and approximately 70% successful at concealing whatever else was moving behind it. He told her the trials were real. They would continue for 19 more months, and he had information that would let her survive every single one of them. She studied him for a moment, the careful study of someone who had already been thinking hard about a problem and was evaluating whether the person in front of them was an answer or a new complication. Then she told him she already knew the trials were real. She had known since the first round and had been trying to figure out her next move, so he explained it properly. Class structure, rank progression, monthly trial timing, which skill categories mattered, and which were designed to look valuable and weren't. She followed each piece of logic to the next, without needing anything restated, asking specific questions that demonstrated she had already built a partial framework on her own, and was slotting his information into gaps rather than starting from nothing. By the time her father appeared from the back to take over the register, she had agreed to coordinate with him going forward. What she didn't know, what he had no particular reason to tell her yet, was that the buffer class she held was the rarest support type in the entire system. 50 to 60% amplification across every ally within range. With her active, his already overwhelming output would push into territory the game's balancing hadn't been designed to accommodate cleanly. He thanked her and walked home under the orange wash of sodium streetlights, running the checklist one final time. Finances structured, Taegu neutralized, Kyungrok confirmed, Min Jury secured, Hwang Young Min remained unaddressed. Sharper than Taegu, more calculating, already patient in the way of someone who planned rather than reacted. He was beginning to identify Wan's circumstances as leverage worth developing. That situation required a different approach than a broken finger and a quiet warning. Young Min needed to stay where he was, behaving exactly as he was, through rounds 2 and 3, for reasons that would only become clear later. The more immediate issue was the Reaper class. It could only be obtained one way. It required specific conditions, a specific consumable, and a specific act that most players would never choose even if they understood it was possible. Ryu Min had already begun the setup. By the time round 2 opened, everything would be in position. The angel assigned to oversee round 2 had no idea what was coming for her. Neither did Hwang Young Min. Neither did the small, arrogant cluster of players already forming hierarchies and making plans and talking about the unknown Black Reaper they had all heard rumors of. This supposed legendary killer operating at a level none of them could verify. The legend was 20 years old and currently deciding which bus to take home. The 3 weeks between round 1 and round 2 moved at the specific velocity of someone running 2 realities simultaneously. The visible one, where Ryu Min was a recently wealthy 20-year-old managing investments and a 14-year-old brother, and the operational one, where nearly every available hour was allocated to tasks that needed to happen in a specific order. He let Wan set the tempo of the visible reality. His brother had a habit of distributing food. It wasn't social ambition. It was simply how Wan was built. He had done it in previous loops too, leaving portions with building superintendents, with elderly neighbors, with whoever happened to be in the elevator when he was carrying something good. In the 3rd week of January, Wan made a batch of New Year's rice cakes from a recipe he had looked up online and spent 2 evenings executing with more concentration than most things received. He divided the batch into small labeled packages and went door to door on their floor and the one above. Ryu Min found out when Wan came home with empty containers and mentioned, as a passing observation, that the woman on the penthouse floor had been very kind and had given him tangerines in return. He asked Wan to describe her. One did, in the vague approximation of someone who hadn't paid close attention. Tall, dark hair, the kind of face you noticed without quite knowing why. A man in a dark formal jacket had been present too, Juan added, and had accepted the rice cakes with a stiffness that made the whole thing feel like a professional transaction. That was Seo Ah-rin and An Sang-chol. Living in the penthouse unit of the building Ryu Min had specifically chosen when he signed the lease. He told Juan the tangerines were a nice touch. Juan shrugged and went to make tea. Hwang Yong-min had spent those same 3 weeks building something. He was 18, lean and deliberate, and had none of Bang Taigu's reliance on size. Where Taigu was a blunt instrument, Hwang operated on information, who owed what to whom, who was vulnerable in what specific way, where the gaps were in systems he had been quietly studying since before anyone knew the trials were real. He had identified 3 students at one school as useful dependencies before January ended. 2 more followed by the first week of February. He hadn't moved directly on one yet. From previous loops, Ryu Min knew this was intentional. Hwang didn't use leverage the moment he found it. He built a buffer first, enough collateral pressure spread across enough people that any retaliation aimed at him would find a wall of secondary threats between them. Ryu Min watched this from a careful distance and left Hwang exactly where he was. The plan required him active and intact through round 3. What it also required was a pressure valve, something that kept Hwang's behavior from producing consequences Ryu Min hadn't accounted for. That opportunity arrived through the penthouse. Seo Ah-rin held a summoner class she hadn't yet told anyone about, a public profile large enough to make press attention a genuine threat, and, as of the second week of February, a problem. Hwang had found her through the apartment building directory and identified her, accurately, as someone with visible wealth, minimal independent security, and a strong incentive to avoid any incident becoming public. His approach was textbook, an engineered situation, a witness, and a quiet number he considered reasonable. An Sang-chol had intercepted it. He was a night class player, capable and loyal, but was operating with the constraint of someone trying to handle a problem without escalating it into something the entertainment press would pick up. Hwang had read that constraint with precision and was using it. Ryu Min became aware of the situation on a Thursday evening when a building security alert appeared on his phone. He recognized the elevator lobby camera angle and recognized Hwang's posture in the frame within 3 seconds. He went downstairs. What followed produced no noise that the penthouse floor's other residents would have registered. Hwang turned when the stairwell door opened and ran his usual assessment: size, posture, probable utility as threat or resource. Ryu Min could see the conclusion arrive and dismiss him. He was used to it. He told Hwang, at a volume suited for a private conversation, that he knew the leverage Hwang had built at the school. He named the 3 students by name and described the nature of their debts. He named 2 additional facts Hwang believed were known only to himself. He watched the assessment in Hwang's expression, develop the specific texture of a person who has just understood that the ground beneath their position is different from what they measured. Then Ryu Min outlined what was going to happen instead. Hwang would step back from Seo Ah-rin's situation entirely. He would also, in round 2 of the trial, beginning in 6 days, volunteer to stand as his group's representative during the election. Not for any reason Hwang would understand yet. Just because Ryu Min was asking him, and because the alternative was what would happen to the school leverage he had so carefully assembled. Hwang studied him. He was looking for the angle, the hidden profit, the thing being withheld. Ryu Min waited. Hwang agreed. Down the hall, An Sang-chol had been watching with the stillness of someone recalibrating. He looked at Ryu Min the way you look at something you weren't expecting and want to understand better. He inclined his head, not quite a bow, but close enough that Ryu Min understood what it meant. He told An Sang-chol to make sure Seo Ah-rin had his contact number. Then he went back downstairs. The Zhang 6 situation required patience but not improvisation. Zhang was 26 and had come into possession of the luminescence rune early in round 1. Through luck he had mistaken for competence. He had spent 3 weeks building what he believed was an airtight approach, identifying Ryu Min as the most accessible high-wealth individual in the building, tracking his routine, preparing a meeting he thought would give him positional advantage and a credible implicit threat. Ryu Min had known about Zhang since Loop 63. He had known for 2 weeks that Zhang was coming, and he had spent that time building not a defense but a context, the precise set of conditions that would cause Jang to produce the rune willingly. The parking garage meeting lasted 11 minutes. 9 of them were Ryu Min naming specific facts about Jang's activities, contacts, and movements, information that Jang had never shared with anyone and considered completely private. He watched the confident entry posture dissolve through confusion into something colder, and then into the specific stillness of someone understanding they have miscalculated not the tactic, but the entire situation. When Jang attempted to leave, he found he couldn't. The rune of inner thoughts arrived in Ryu Min's status screen quietly. Surface-level thought reading within a 30-meter radius. Not full access, more like the loudest impression sitting in someone's mind when they stood close enough. Intent, decision, the moment a person nearby chose something they hadn't said aloud. He let Jang go. Jang's usefulness had ended, and his absence from this interaction kept the downstream cleaner. Walking home, he turned the rune's interface over in his mind. It would matter considerably in round 4, during the PvP phase, when knowing which players had already decided to break an agreement would be worth more than any combat skill he carried. Round 2 began on the 1st of February, under the same red sky. Burial's announcement this month was different. Round 2 was a non-combat representative election. Each cluster of 100 players would select a single representative to manage their group's reward allocation, bonus distribution, and communal resource decisions. No mandatory combat. Participation levels entirely up to the individual. The penalty clause, which Burial mentioned with the same flat intonation as everything else, was this. If a representative exploited their position, took excess cuts, made decisions that demonstrably disadvantaged their group, the system would apply a permanent 50% reduction across all their base attributes. Permanent, irreversible, no appeal process in existence. Ryu Min raised his hand before Burial finished the sentence. He had run the numbers and concluded the representative role was a large leverage opportunity, with a penalty clause he was clever enough to navigate. He was right about the leverage, he was wrong about the navigation. Ryu Min watched Huang campaign, practiced warmth, specific promises, a comfort with the crowd that came from years of knowing how to read what people wanted to hear. He won the vote with a comfortable majority, then spent the next 40 minutes managing the group's reward pool in ways that served himself first, in increments small enough that any individual objection would feel disproportionate. He was good at it. The system noted every increment. The system was, among other things, thorough. While the election played out in the central arena, Ryu Min moved to the left perimeter. Non-combat designation didn't eliminate goblins. They were still spawning in the peripheral corridors for players who preferred independent leveling to group mechanics. The main population was absorbed by the election. The corridors were effectively empty. He cleared the first one in 8 minutes and moved to the second. By the time Huang was completing his third redistribution decision, each one marginally more self-serving than the last, each one more data point accumulating in the system's record, Ryu Min had reached level 8 and was moving through the third corridor. At level 9, a class selection prompt appeared in his screen. The standard roster loaded beneath it: warrior, mage, archer, priest, rogue. And below those, in a separate category marked unique and grayed out with an unmet requirement listed underneath. A single entry. Reaper. Requires angel's blood. He reached into his jacket, found the vial he had carried since the end of round 1, and held it for a moment. The liquid still held its quiet gold luminescence. He had thought, in earlier loops, that consuming something from a divine being would register as foreign, that the body would hesitate. It didn't. The taste was faint, almost nothing. The system processed for 3 seconds. Then the screen cleared and rebuilt itself from the ground up. The standard class options were gone. In the unique category, the grade entry had resolved. Reaper. Below it, the class parameters expanded. Dual attribute damage scaling across physical and magical both, with the Reaper Scythe as primary weapon type. Passive skills loaded alongside the actives. Death detection, stealth gradients, trace elimination, skills that no other class in the system carried. He accepted the class and went back to the goblins. Level 10 arrived 6 minutes later. The apprentice rank notification appeared at the top of his screen, and with it came a system confirmation that the Reaper class, as a unique type, was now bound permanently to his account. It could not be removed, reassigned, or stripped by any known mechanic. He stood in the empty corridor and allowed himself one full moment of quiet. 99 loops, and he had never arrived at this particular configuration cleanly. Class secured, finances stable, alliances in place, his brother asleep safely in an apartment with good locks. He had spent lifetimes assembling the specific conditions for this moment, and most of those lifetimes had ended with something going wrong before he got here. Then he moved on to the fourth corridor, because the round wasn't over. The round rankings announced by Burial confirmed Ryu Min at the top of the individual experience board for the second consecutive month. The same cluster of attention formed afterward, survivors beginning to recognize the pattern of a name that appeared first, twice. He didn't wait for it. The exit was on his left, and he used it. On the online player forums that had been running since round 1, the ones where surviving participants compared notes, argued about class mechanics, and tried to piece together who the high performers were and what they were doing, the name Black Scythe appeared for the first time. Someone had been in an adjacent corridor during the last 20 minutes of round 2, and had caught a partial view of the Reaper class in operation. They described the weapon, the visual signature of the skill activations, the speed. The post asked if anyone else had seen this player or knew what class it was. The first 43 replies arrived within an hour. By morning, the thread had 600 responses, most of them speculation, none of them close. Black Scythe was on the subway headed home, one earbud in, reading the round summary on his phone. He got off at his stop, bought groceries because Juan had mentioned they were low on eggs, and walked the rest of the way in the February cold. Back in his apartment, he opened the full Reaper class breakdown and reviewed what he had and what was still incomplete. The base scythe sat in his inventory. Functional, not yet what it would become. The stealth passive was partial at this level, detection radius limited. The skill set would need 3 more rounds of development before everything was working at the level round 5 required. He was still reviewing the skill progression chart when Juan knocked, leaned in the doorway with a phone charger he had borrowed 3 days earlier, handed it back without comment, and asked if Ryu Min had eaten. Ryu Min said he had. One looked at him with the specific evaluating expression of someone who had caught their older brother significantly underreporting on this particular question before. He said he'd left rice in the cooker, just in case, and went back to his room without making it into a conversation. Ryu Min closed the status screen an hour later. He thought about round 3 in the way you think about a mechanism you have designed carefully and are about to set in motion. The round was a defense trial, combat mandatory, with a boss encounter the system classified as a divine punishment agent, a creature that had destroyed every player group that had attempted it without the specific preparation required. In every previous loop, parties of level 40 players had needed to coordinate over multiple engagement phases just to keep it contained. He was going to handle it differently this time. Huang Yongmin also had a moment waiting for him in round 3. A relic, a decision. A consequence Huang would not understand was inevitable until it had already happened. Ryu Min looked at the Reaper scythe in his inventory and thought about the divine punishment agent's wing structure. He had been planning this particular confrontation since Loop 78, when he had first understood what the class combination made possible if you removed the light. He put the phone down. Eggs needed to go in the refrigerator, and he had 11 position reviews before the market opened. Round 3 was 4 weeks away. He had work to do. The amusement park was Juan's idea. He had been mentioning Everland since December. Not pushing, not pressuring. Just placing it in conversation at intervals, the way someone leaves a book face down on a table. Ryu Min had been registering each mention and filing it behind a list of more immediate concerns, and one morning in mid-February, with the round 3 investments compounding on schedule and 3 weeks still to the next trial, he bought 2 tickets and told Juan to wear something warm. Juan's response was controlled to the point of comedy. He said it sounded fine. He went to his room. Ryu Min heard a drawer open and close twice in quick succession. They went on a Wednesday, when the park ran thin enough to move through without much waiting. Juan went straight to the merchandise section first. He had clearly been planning this specifically, because he found the panda headbands in under a minute, selected 2 without deliberating, and placed one on his own head and the other on Ryu Min's before Ryu Min had entirely registered what was happening. He stepped back and assessed the result with genuine critical attention. He said it looked fine. Ryu Min wore it for the rest of the morning. Between rides, Juan talked. A classmate he had complicated feelings about. A group project almost finished. A song he had been hunting for 2 days after hearing it once from someone else's phone. He talked the way he did when nothing was pressuring him. Freely, with the thread dropping wherever it went. Ryu Min listened and occasionally responded. He bought Juan lunch at the place Juan picked, and later a second thing from the gift shop that Juan argued against for approximately 45 seconds before carrying it with the specific careful casualness of someone very pleased with something they preferred not to show. On the drive home, Juan fell asleep in the passenger seat 20 minutes outside the city. Ryu Min drove in the quiet. He had a board review in 8 hours covering round 3 projections. He let his brother sleep and kept the radio off. Round 3 brought a new mechanic, which Burial introduced with her customary absence of emphasis. Each player group would receive a single relic at the start of the round, a physical object carrying collective buffs for all group members through the wave defense phases. The relic could be used, held, or destroyed. Destruction granted the destroyer an immediate personal bonus, paid for by stripping the group benefit and adding a violation flag to the destroyer's account. The flag accumulated alongside any existing system notations. Burial stated this without particular inflection. She did not mention what happened when the flag threshold was crossed, or what the existing notation on Hwang Yong-min's account currently read after 3 redistribution incidents in round 2. Hwang had done his own analysis. He was not careless. He had sourced every available piece of published game mechanic information and calculated that the round 2 violations were capped in accumulation potential. He had concluded he had stayed under the ceiling. He was wrong about the ceiling. Ryu Min had let him reach that conclusion without interference, because correcting it would have served nothing. The relic in Hwang's group was a coordination enhancement, resistance buffs, tighter formation response timing across all holders. Worth keeping. Hwang held it through the first 2 wave phases while his group stabilized, and his own internal calculation ran in the background. In the 3rd phase, when the incoming wave occupied everyone's attention and no one was watching him specifically, he destroyed the relic. The personal bonus loaded into his stat screen immediately, clean and substantial. He managed his expression during it the way someone manages a door they don't want to make noise. His group registered the collective buff drop and he offered a prepared mechanics explanation. Several of them accepted it. They were busy fighting. The system recorded the destruction. The flag crossed the threshold. The permanent stat reduction was 50%, applied across all base attributes simultaneously, with no reversal mechanism the system made available to players. Ryu Min saw the moment it landed from 12 meters away. A small, involuntary stillness in Hwang's posture, the kind produced by reading a number twice, because the first reading failed to make sense. Hwang checked his screen again. His jaw didn't move. Nearby, one of his group members asked if something was wrong. Hwang said nothing was wrong. The 3 associates who had been using Hwang's information advantage as their own margin of safety checked his shared stat display through the group interface, read the new values, and exchanged a look that lasted about 2 seconds. When the 4th wave hit, Hwang was standing slightly apart, and the radius around him had the specific quality of space that nobody wanted to be the one to close. Ryu Min passed within 6 meters of him on the way to the left corridor and didn't slow down. The Divine Punishment agent would arrive in 37 minutes. He had preparations. Every player network, every cross-zone forum exchange, every surviving participant who had been comparing notes since round 1 arrived at the same conclusion regarding the agent: do not engage it alone. The entity entered as a late addition after the standard defense phases. Enormous, white-armored, carrying weapons the system flagged as divine class with damage values that scaled against prior eliminations. 2 documented attempts by coordinated groups of level 40 players had ended in total wipes before the agent reached half health. The recommended posture, where any posture existed at all, was multi-party sustained assault with dedicated suppression lines and 2 high-level healers minimum. Ryu Min had one thing he intended to use, and it was not suppression. Night of Death was a Reaper active, a bounded field of absolute complete darkness, extending 30 meters in all directions, lasting 4 minutes at current level. Not dimness, not reduced visibility. The functional kind of dark that removed all visual input entirely for every entity inside the field, regardless of what light sources existed. Human players and divine entities equally. The agent's combat profile was almost entirely visual. Target acquisition, attack sequencing, positional tracking, all of it built on a divine sensory framework that had never needed to account for encountering a darkness it could not process. Ryu Min had confirmed this vulnerability across 11 separate tests in 11 previous loops, at the cost of 11 group wipes and 11 resets. He was not guessing at a weak point. He had mapped it. The agent descended at the 38th minute, a column of white light from above, 7 meters of white armor that made Burial look modestly scaled by comparison. Wings that moved the air in the arena when they adjusted. A weapon in each hand classified in Ryu Min's status screen as Divine Category, one contact lethal to any player below level 50. Behind him, he heard several people begin to run. He activated Night of Death. The arena ceased to exist visually. The agent's entry column cut off mid-beam. Every light source within the field boundary stopped functioning. Sound continued. Running footsteps, the agent's wings adjusting, the structural creak of the platform beneath them. But there was nothing to see in any direction for anyone inside the radius. Ryu Min had the complete spatial layout of the arena floor memorized from the start of the round. He moved left, then forward again, counting steps. His breathing stayed even. The agent's sounds changed. The specific, searching cadence of a combat entity running a secondary protocol that had not been built for primary use. Slower. The wings adjusted twice as it tried to re-establish aerial distance from a threat it could no longer locate. He arrived at position 14 steps forward and activated Death Insignia. The mark didn't require visual contact. It needed proximity and a life signature to lock, and the agent was producing both. The HP bar opened in his interface. Legible to him, irrelevant to the agent's secondary targeting system. Damage amplification loaded at 70%. He felt the skill settle the way it always did. Not dramatic, just available. He started working. Reaper combat was not loud, and it was not theatrical. It was a sequence of positional decisions and timed activations, each one layering death seal stacks that amplified the effect of subsequent hits. He moved between every strike. No position repeated, no pattern held long enough for even instinct-level modeling. The agent struck twice into empty space to his left, and once into the space where he had been 4 seconds earlier. Each miss carried the small, disoriented adjustment of a divine entity encountering conditions it hadn't been built to navigate. The wings came off at the 3-minute mark. Not one clean severing, accumulated damage at full seal stacks, delivered across a targeting sequence Ryu Min had mapped across multiple previous encounters, aimed at the structural joints. The first wing separated with a resonance that moved through the dark like a low bell struck once. The second followed 18 seconds later. The agent's movement changed immediately. Grounded, still imposing, but missing the aerial repositioning that made it genuinely dangerous at range. He stepped back and checked the interface. 42% health remaining. 2 minutes and 11 seconds in the field. He went back in. The final sequence was 94 seconds. Moonlight slash once, at the moment the agent's recovery posture gave him the geometric opening for the ranged cone, the connection landed clean and produced the largest single-hit figure in his current loop's record. Satisfying in the specific way that only something built across decades of combined planning can be. The agent went down. Night of Death expired 4 seconds later. Light returned to the arena in an abrupt flood, and the players around the field's perimeter stood blinking at a downed divine entity, and a single player standing beside it, not particularly hurried, reading his status screen. A few had caught partial glimpses through the edge of the field during the fight, the outline of a curved black weapon, the direction the agent's failed strikes had aimed. None of them had enough for a complete picture, enough for 17 new forum threads by the time the round closed. The drops materialized. 4 items, all physical, all bearing the system tag Rare Crafting Component. Master-level maintenance skill required. A dark red heart the size of a closed fist. A carved bone totem. A divine alloy arrowhead. A diamond-grade crystal fragment. He took all 4 and moved toward the exit while the crowd was still processing what the floor in front of them meant. The round closed with Ryu Min at level 29. The announcer's voice, reading the ranking, had developed its now familiar texture of something that had expected different numbers. He passed Huang Yongmin in the exit corridor. Huang was talking to the one remaining associate who hadn't yet opened distance between them. The conversation had the taut, controlled quality of someone rebuilding a position in real time and hoping the effort wasn't visible. His stats were half their previous values. His standing in his group had the specific character of something that can be reconstructed but not restored to its original form. Ryu Min didn't slow down. The trap had worked precisely. The important element was what had not happened. Huang was alive and functional. His ego, which was the actual operational resource in this scheme, had taken enough damage that he was going to do something reckless in round 4 trying to recover ground. The specific kind of reckless that Ryu Min needed him to do, in the specific arena where round 4 was going to unfold. He stepped through the exit and came back to his body. The month between rounds moved with the dense forward momentum of someone managing many things that refused to be managed in parallel. The crafting reagents from the agent went into secure storage. They needed Daniel, an English blacksmith with level 20 weapon maintenance skill, the only artisan in Ryu Min's research across multiple loops capable of incorporating divine-grade materials into a weapon upgrade. That meeting waited until after round 5, when the player network would have enough structure to make the trip's logistics sensible. The work he could do now was the work closest to completion. Kyung-Rok had moved faster than Ryu Min's baseline estimates. The combination of forward information and Kyung-Rok's operational efficiency was producing outcomes neither of them could have managed independently, and the board members who had spent January calculating their tolerance for a 20-year-old anomaly had stopped doing that. They looked at him now, the way people look at a working mechanism they've decided to stop questioning. He found Kyung-Rok on a Thursday evening, going through round 4 projections with An Sang-cheol in the 14th floor conference room. Sang-cheol with his notes, Kyung-Rok with the specific stillness of someone thinking at full capacity. The structure Kyung-Rok was building for round 4 was well designed and was going to encounter a problem he hadn't accounted for. Ryu Min told him round 4 was mandatory PvP. Kyung-Rok set his coffee down and looked at the window for several seconds. Then he asked how the mechanics worked, what the distribution of elimination zones looked like, and what positioning gave the best survival probability for a coordinated group. Ryu Min talked for 40 minutes. Sang-cheol filled 3 pages of notes. At the end, Kyung-Rok asked where Ryu Min himself intended to operate. The left elimination corridor, Ryu Min told him, solo. Kyung-Rok studied him with the flatness of someone who had just made a calculation and was deciding whether to say it out loud. He decided against it. He nodded once and went back to the projection charts. Min Juri came to their Tuesday morning cafe with a notepad covered in her uphill handwriting and 3 days of independent analysis she'd been building on the buffer class's scaling behavior across party configurations. She spread it across the table and walked him through her conclusions without preamble. She was largely right. The 50 to 60% amplification was a conservative floor. Under specific maximum stat gap conditions, the actual multiplier operated closer to 75. She had derived this from 4 rounds of her own careful observation, which was a more rigorous analysis than most unique class players managed in 10. He confirmed the numbers and added 2 variables she hadn't encountered yet. She wrote them down in the uphill hand without looking up. She asked, still writing, whether round 4 was going to be as difficult as she suspected. He told her it was. She was quiet for a moment. She added soy sauce to her food without appearing to notice she was doing it. Then she asked what positioning made the most sense for her. He said she needed protected placement, within his coordination radius if possible, covered enough to maintain buff output without becoming a direct target. She was not a combat class. Her value was in what she amplified, and that meant keeping her out of direct engagement was a strategic priority, not a gesture. She looked at him when he said that. A brief look, just enough to register, and then she was back at the notepad. She made a note of something in the margin. Round 4 was 4 weeks away. He thought about 722 kills and what it would cost to deliver that number cleanly. The routing, the positioning, the management of the spaces between engagements where a mistake could compound. He thought about Hwang Young-min and the conversation they were going to have in a hallway after round 4 ended, in the real world, in the very last version of that conversation that would ever need to happen. He finished his coffee and went through the next item on the list. It was long. It always was. The distance between where he was and where he needed to be before round 20 could be won was still significant, and the months between now and then would move with the specific indifference of time that does not adjust its pace for what is at stake. He had been navigating that distance for 99 attempts. He was not going to lose count now. Round 4's announcement landed differently than any before it. Burial read the mechanics with her standard lack of ceremony. This round, players could eliminate each other. Kills earned points. Points determined ranking, and ranking determined the quality of reward allocation for the following month. No mandatory grouping. No protected zones. The only rule was the scoring system, which weighted kills logarithmically. Early kills worth more, later ones worth progressively less as the competitive pool thinned. The platform lights shifted from white to amber when she finished, and the silence that followed had a specific character that none of the previous round silences had carried. People looked at the people next to them. Ryu Min was already moving. He had scouted the left elimination corridor during rounds 2 and 3 and understood its geometry precisely. A long central channel with 4 branching sections that created natural bottlenecks. Players moving through it would funnel. Players choosing it early, which they would because the entry point sat nearest the initial spawn cluster, would arrive in waves with built-in spacing gaps. He reached the first bottleneck 11 seconds before the first group did. He was not Black Scythe yet in the minds of the people who entered that corridor. He was nobody. An unremarkable player who had placed first twice in rounds no one had found particularly interesting. What they saw was a young man standing in a narrow corridor holding a scythe that looked custom-built in an era when most players were carrying standard system drops. Most of them had partners. Groups of 3 and 4, moving with the nervous coordination of people who had agreed not to turn on each other until the numbers thinned elsewhere first. He activated Death Insignia before the first group closed to range. The mark selected targets, loaded the HP display across all 6 of them simultaneously, and began stacking. He didn't wait for them to reach him. Moonlight Slash carried 1200% dual attribute damage in a ranged cone. At his current stack multiplier, the cone clearing 6 targets in a single activation was not a projected outcome. It was a mechanical certainty he had confirmed across multiple loops. The first group stopped existing as a group 8 seconds after entering the corridor. He moved to the second bottleneck. The eliminations came in rhythms after that, groups arriving, taking some time to process what they were looking at, and then ceasing to be problems. He varied the approach by corridor section and by group configuration. Because the Reaper class rewarded adaptive sequencing, and because doing the same thing repeatedly was the kind of pattern a clever opponent could adjust to. Nobody in round 4 had reached the level of clever he was guarding against, but the habit mattered. At 100 kills, his name appeared at the top of the round leaderboard. Nobody moved toward him after that. The players who had been watching from the perimeter of his corridor made the collective decision to find somewhere else to be, which was the correct decision, and which also meant he had to change corridors to maintain the pace he needed. He changed corridors. The round had been running 2 hours and 40 minutes when the announcer called his final total, 722 unique eliminations. Second place had 41. He stood in the amber-lit arena with his stats at full and his scythe retracted and read the round summary in his interface. First place in every scoring category the system tracked. He waited for the exit to open, stepped through, and came back to his body in his apartment. He sat still for several seconds, running the physical check he always ran after a PvP round. No lasting injuries, no system flags on his account. The clone rune he was about to acquire still listed in the upcoming status milestone. The rune arrived 3 hours later, as a real-world system drop tied to the round's first-place achievement bonus. Clone Rune generates 1 intangible presence and 1 identical duplicate. Not a combat tool in the conventional sense, the duplicate had no independent agency, but useful for creating verification gaps, for convincing someone they had confirmed something they hadn't confirmed. He had a specific use planned for it that was still several rounds away. He filed it and looked at his list. Hwang Yong-min was near the top. He had the address. He had had it since mid-January. Hwang lived in a mid-rise building 2 districts over, in a unit on the 8th floor that he shared with no one. The building had keycard lobby access and a security camera at the main entrance. Standard for the area, angled to capture entry and exit rather than the elevator lobby or the corridors. Ryu Min had noted the camera angle on his second visit to the building and the maintenance schedule gap that left the 8th floor corridor camera running on a 6-hour cycle with a 19-minute warm-up period during reset. He went on a Tuesday. The door opened on the second knock. Huang had lost the physical confidence he had carried in round 1. The 50% stat reduction that wasn't reversible had left a posture behind it that was still composed, but narrow at the edges, like a building that has lost a structural element and adjusted its weight distribution around the gap. He assessed Ryu Min at the door with the calculating attention of someone who had been carefully reassessing every variable for weeks. He let him in. He was curious, and curiosity, Ryu Min had observed across 11 loops of knowing him, was the quality that overrode Huang's caution more consistently than anything else. The apartment was organized in a way that confirmed the general pattern: surfaces clear, items where they would be used, nothing left out that didn't serve a purpose. A player ranking board on his secondary monitor showed 11 bookmarked threads, all of them tracking the forum presence of the player currently called Black Scythe. Huang saw where Ryu Min's eyes went. He didn't look away from Ryu Min's face. Ryu Min told him the ranking board could be closed. He said he was Black Scythe. The quiet that followed had a specific texture. Not disbelief, not quite, but the stillness of someone rapidly running a sequence of implications and finding each one coherent. Huang's eyes moved across Ryu Min in the specific way they moved when he was reassessing a person's threat classification from the beginning. He said that wasn't possible. Ryu Min activated Death Insignia. The skill's visual signature was compact at close range, a brief darkening of the air at the target's outline, gone before a blink. Huang's player status registered in Ryu Min's interface. HP bar open, current values visible. The 50% reduction was clearly readable in the numbers. He let Huang see the interface on his own screen through the shared display function and watch his own HP bar appear in someone else's targeting system. Huang's hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, were not relaxed anymore. Ryu Min told him what he had done in round 2. He named each redistribution incident. He named the relic destruction and the exact flag count that had triggered the penalty, and he described the specific calculation error Huang had made in assessing the violation ceiling, not to explain it, but so Huang understood with precision how completely he had been read. He told him he had also known about 1. The school operation, the students, the plan. He had known in January and had chosen the timing of every intervention deliberately. Huang's expression had moved through several distinct phases and arrived at something flat and very careful. He asked what Ryu Min wanted. Ryu Min told him he didn't want anything from him. He had wanted specific things from him, and he had already obtained them. Huang had filled the role he needed. The round 3 relic, the round 4 participation that produced a specific distribution of players in the left corridor. The useful portion of their relationship had ended. He raised the scythe. Huang moved, the quick lateral step of someone who had been calculating whether that moment would come and had a response ready. It was a well-timed move. Ryu Min had been expecting it since Huang's hands changed 2 minutes earlier, and he moved with it rather than against it. The arm came off below the elbow, clean, fast, the sound of it precise and final. Huang hit the wall. The rune of inner thoughts delivered his surface thought in the half-second before shock closed everything down. He had not believed it would actually happen. Ryu Min completed it. He used erase traces on the result, black fire, quiet, total, and left through the stairwell. Walking home, he felt no particular thing about it. He had executed Huang Yong Min in 11 previous loops and had spent the first 3 of them with complicated feelings about it. By loop 30, he had reached the conclusion that the feeling most appropriate to the action was not satisfaction and not guilt, but the neutral close of a logical sequence. A plan with a specific required endpoint, reached cleanly. One was asleep when he got home. He checked the door lock, washed his hands, and went to bed. Round 5 opened on a platform Ryu Min had never stood on before. Zone mergers triggered when regional participant counts dropped below critical thresholds. 10 zones combining into a single arena when the collective survivor pool fell below the minimum viable number for individual operation. This was the first merger event. The platform was 3 times the standard size. The population on it was correspondingly larger, and standing in a loose ring near the far perimeter were 9 people carrying themselves with the specific posture of individuals who had been the most capable person in their respective zones and had not yet found a reason to update that assessment. 9 former zone leaders. All of them level 18 to 22 from their individual round performances. All of them looking at the first-place leaderboard name that had been appearing at the top of every round summary for 4 months and deciding, collectively, that the current setting was the appropriate moment to address the situation. They moved on him simultaneously. It was a reasonable strategy given what they knew. 6 seconds later, the Reaper Scythe had completed a full rotation sequence across the combined group, and the platform had 9 new vacancy markers where players had been. Their guide angels, 3 of them, managing the merged zone, observed this in a silence that held the specific quality of entities that had expected a long fight and had not received one. Ryu Min checked his status screen, confirmed no residual damage worth noting, and went to find Min Jury. She was in the center sector, holding position inside a defensive formation with 4 players she had been coordinating since round 3. Her buff radius was active. He could see the stat enhancement markers on every player within range, the familiar blue-gold overlay that indicated buffer output at full output. Her numbers had moved. She was at level 17, 3 rounds of consistent performance showing in her base values. He needed her at level 20 before the round ended. He told her to stay on him. What followed was 3 hours of precise mob routing through the merged zone's expanded corridor system, with Min Jury's buffs active on him at every engagement. The amplification at her current level pushed his output into ranges that made standard mob encounters function more like scheduled appointments than fights. She kept pace, maintained the radius, and managed her own cooldown timing with the efficiency of someone who had been studying the class's internal rhythm since the day she received it. Level 20 arrived at the 2-hour and 40-minute mark. She stopped walking when the notification loaded. She stood still for a second, reading the rank advancement, regular tier, with the skill upgrades that came alongside it, and something in her expression went very quiet in the specific way of a person who has crossed a threshold they had been moving toward for a long time. She said she'd made it, he said she had, and they needed to keep moving. The Superior Orc was spawning in 18 minutes. The Superior Orc was the merged zone's primary boss. On the shared combat network, it carried the classification tag of a creature that had ended parties of level 25 to 35 players in prior encounters. Heavy physical stats, high regeneration, a damage multiplier that scaled against group targets and made sustained assault the wrong approach. The recommended strategy was sustained hit-and-run attrition over multiple engagement cycles. Ryu Min pulled Min Jury's buff radius active and positioned her at the optimum angle behind him. With her level 20 buffs applied, his stat values passed a threshold the system had not been calibrated for at his level tier. Moonlight Slash at full Death Seal stacks and maximum amplification produced a damage figure that exceeded the Superior Orc's total HP in a single activation. He activated the skill at the moment the Orc fully materialized. The Orc ceased to exist in roughly 1 second. The cleared space where a creature the size of a construction crane had stood a moment earlier was quiet. Min Jury lowered her hands from the buff form stance and looked at the empty ground for several seconds without speaking. Around the perimeter of the arena, the remaining zone participants who had gathered at what they had expected to be a long raid encounter looked at the space as well. The round announcer called the boss clear time. The previous world record, posted 3 rounds prior by a coordinated level 40 party, had been 6 minutes and 42 seconds. The new figure was fractionally above 1 second. The Rune of Balance dropped from the clear reward pool alongside the standard boss loot. He took it and read the parameters. If the gap between his highest and lowest base stat values stayed within 10 points of each other, all pure base attributes doubled. The stat maintenance it required was meticulous. He would need to balance allocations precisely with every level gained. In return, the payoff was a multiplier that turned his already elevated values into something the system's combat projections genuinely couldn't accommodate. He began planning the allocation adjustments on the walk back across the platform. Min Jury, beside him, was still looking at her status screen. She said, quietly, that she was starting to understand why he needed a buffer specifically. He said she was figuring out the right things. She said something else under her breath that he chose not to pursue through the rune of inner thoughts. He filed the moment and kept walking. Player Place was Gyeongrock's idea in the sense that Ryu Min had described the concept 3 months earlier, and Gyeongrock had recognized the structural potential before Ryu Min finished the sentence. What it would become, a unified marketplace for player goods, class services, and game mechanic consulting, needed a specific foundation: legal registration, operating capital, and a blacksmith capable of handling divine-grade crafting materials. The first 2, Gyeongrock assembled within a week of the Round 5 close. The third was in England. Daniel had been a weapons maintenance specialist before the trials started, a craftsman's practice inherited from his father, refined over 20 years, currently operating out of a workshop in a narrow building outside Sheffield where the floor slanted slightly, and he kept his best work on a shelf beside the window where the morning light hit it. He held weapon maintenance at level 20+, a figure that placed him in a category occupied by fewer than 12 players worldwide. He also had the specific quality of complete indifference to who was asking and what they represented, which was either a character trait or a professional standard Ryu Min had never been able to determine cleanly across multiple meetings. He had confirmed Daniel's location through the Round 5 player network and booked the flight with Ma Young Rock's organizational support. They took the morning departure, arrived in Sheffield by early afternoon, found the workshop on the second attempt after the navigation application disagreed with the local street layout, and knocked. Daniel opened the door, looked at them, looked at the case Ryu Min was carrying, and stepped back to let them in without asking who they were. The workshop smelled of mineral oil and heated metal. He sat across a workbench from them and examined the crafting materials, the orc heart, the totem, the divine arrowhead, the crystal fragment, with the particular attention of a person evaluating something they have heard about and are now actually touching. He said it could be done. He named the timeline and his conditions. Ryu Min had brought the payment in the correct form and the correct amount. He set it on the bench. Daniel looked at it briefly, the way a professional looks at a contract they intend to honor, and said he'd begin the following morning. The Scythe of Death was ready 3 days later. Ryu Min held it in Daniel's workshop with the morning light coming through the window behind him and ran the stat integration. Unique grade. The base damage values were the highest he had carried in any loop. The divine material infusion had converted the weapon's typing from standard physical to dual attribute, physical and magical simultaneously, which meant the Death Seal amplification stacked across both damage categories instead of one. He said the work was good. Daniel said he knew it was and asked if there was anything else. Ryu Min told him he would be needed again and that the next project would be larger. Daniel asked no questions about what that meant. He turned back to his workbench. Round 6 was a team trial. 5-player teams, fixed composition for the duration of the round, with boss encounters scaled to coordinated group assault. Ryu Min had been planning the team roster since January. Min Jury for buff output, Seo Ah-rin for the summoner utility her fairy and golem could provide in crowd management, An Song-chol for defensive positioning, and Heo Tae-suk for supplementary damage from a dark mage class that nobody in the current player network had yet identified as particularly powerful. He had met Heo Tae-suk twice before round 6. The first meeting had been brief and observational. A young man in his early 20s, slightly hunched, with the specific quiet of someone carrying more weight than they'd been given tools to manage. The second meeting had run longer. Tae-suk's grandmother was ill and requiring care that was difficult to sustain on what he was making, and he had been channeling everything he had into keeping her situation stable, taking beatings from several people he owed money to without complaint, because complaint required energy he needed elsewhere. He told Tae-suk that round 6 required a dark mage at his level. He offered him a team slot and a retainer fee that solved the immediate problem and established a working arrangement going forward. Tae-suk had looked at him for a long moment. He said he would need to make sure his grandmother would be checked on if the round ran long. Ryu Min said that could be arranged. The 5 of them assembled on the round 6 platform under a sky that had shifted from the familiar crimson to a deep amber. Zone conditions changing as the merged territories developed their own atmospheric signature. Centaur mobs occupied the main field in large formations. Standard strategy called for careful separation of groups and slow attrition to manage the aggro radius. He sent Min Jury to optimum buff position and started working. 1,920 centaurs. He cleared them in 9 coordinated waves, with the team managing crowd lanes and buffer rotations while he handled the primary elimination sequencing. By the 17th wave, Tae-suk had stopped trying to visually track what was happening in Ryu Min's section of the field and was simply maintaining his assigned lane with the focused quiet of someone who had recalibrated what capable looked like. The Minotaur emerged at the end of wave 19. It was large in the way the superior orc had been large, the kind of scale that caused players who hadn't seen it before to take an involuntary step back when it fully materialized. 12 feet of dense muscle, weapons in both hands, a damage classification the round summary would later flag as raid tier. It surveyed the field with the slow, deliberate attention of something that had been placed in this arena specifically because nothing in it was expected to survive long enough to threaten it. Min Juri had her buffs at full output. An Sangcheol had the perimeter locked. Taesok was in position. Ryu Min activated Death Insignia, held the amplification stacks for 3 seconds, and drove Moonlight Slash into the Minotaur at full multiplier. 1 second. Clean. The world record for the merged zone's primary boss clear stood, as of approximately 4 seconds ago, at the longest it had been. His own record from round 5 was already considered an outlier that the community had been arguing about in terms of methodology and measurement precision for weeks. He filed 2 records in the same loop and looked at his status screen. Level 54. Grandmaster rank reachable by round 8 on current pace, if allocation remained clean. An Sangcheol was looking at him from across the clear sight with an expression that had moved past recalibration and arrived somewhere quieter. Taesok had sat down on the ground. Min Juri was reading her post-round stat summary with the focused attention of someone who had noticed the numbers were significantly different from what she'd expected and was working out why. He told them the round was done and to be ready for the exit. The real-world meeting with Kyungrok happened 2 days after the round 6 close, in the 14th floor conference room that had become their standard meeting space. Kyungrok had the player place registration finalized, the operating structure assembled, and 3 board members on the line via conference call who had been involved since January and had stopped requiring proof of concept several months back. The agenda was revenue distribution, expansion timeline, and the second phase of the marketplace's planned service categories. Ryu Min let the meeting run through its full structure. He listened, contributed where the contribution mattered, and waited. When the board members dropped off the call and Sangcheol had stepped out for a moment, he told Kyungrok that he knew about Christine Craig. Kyungrok set his pen down. The small, controlled motion of someone who had been waiting for a specific piece of information to surface and was managing the moment of its arrival. He looked at Ryu Min across the table with the flatness of someone doing rapid interior calculation. He asked how. Ryu Min said the how was less important than the fact that he knew she held the priestess class, and that revival magic at level 60 was the only player ability in the current system capable of full resurrection in the field. He said that round 20 had a specific encounter structure that required resurrection capability to clear without total party loss, and that Christine Craig, being Kyungrok's secret fiancée and currently residing in the UK while they conducted business meetings 3 times a week, was information that affected every plan they had built together. Kyungrok said nothing for 8 seconds. Then he asked what Ryu Min intended to do about it. Ryu Min looked at him across the table, at the man who had built Celestial Demon Consultancy from a private venture into the most strategically positioned player organization in Korea in 6 months, who had read Ryu Min's profit cover story and accepted it as the most probable explanation for what he was seeing, who had asked what Ryu Min needed from him on their second meeting and had meant it. He told him he intended to integrate her, that Christine Craig needed to be brought into the preparation structure, trained to understand the game mechanics at a competitive level, and placed on the round 20 roster where her class would be the margin between a clearing run and a total loss. He said Kyungrok had approximately 12 hours to decide how much of that process he wanted to control personally before Ryu Min began making the arrangements independently. Kyungrok looked at the window for a moment, the same window he had looked at when Ryu Min told him round 4 was PvP. A specific thinking posture, one Ryu Min had learned to read as the outward sign of a decision already made and being checked once more before delivery. He said he wanted to control all of it. Ryu Min said that was the right answer. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, told Kyungrok he expected a timeline by Friday, and walked out through the conference room door into the corridor. The elevator was already open. He stepped in and watched the floor number count down in the reflection of the steel panel. The Scythe of Death was back at the apartment, secured. Christine Craig was in England with level 60 revival capability she hadn't yet developed, in a future she didn't know was being planned around her. The entity above the angels, whatever sat at the top of the system that was harvesting Earth's young population month by month, had not yet felt any evidence that this particular loop was different from the ones before it. 14 more rounds. He stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, nodded at the security desk, and walked out into the evening.